Hi. Hi, this is Jim from Shiloh Hall, and I want to do some work on the resurrection. And the resurrection can be found in both the New and the Old writings. I believe that most of Christianity is familiar with the resurrection found in the New writings. Probably less familiar with the fact that it's found in the Old writings, but that's what I wish to try to bring out. And I think that it's extremely important because, well, I say it's important. The timing and the substance, I believe, are important, not so much for salvation and not even for attaining the resurrection, because it matters less that you understand when and what the resurrection looks like than it does that you do the work, uh, the acts, perform the obedience that is required to attain the resurrection. So as long as you're doing Torah, as long as you're doing really just all the works in obedience to Yahuwah the Father and Yahushua the Son, you're going to attain the resurrection whether you understand timing or substance. But I do want to share that I believe that when you're trying to understand Paul is, it's well known that Paul's writings can be confusing, and they've become more confusing because the church has offered um, interpretations of what Paul is writing that really don't reflect the understanding of the day. So it becomes confusing, and as Peter says, many who are unlearned um, end up taking his words and twisting them or changing them and interpreting them in ways that work against them, and really, according to Paul, even unto their destructions. Or not Paul, but unto Peter, according to Peter, they twist Paul's words to their own destruction. So I think it's important because if you want to understand Paul, I think it has relationship to Torah and understanding his teachings on Torah, but also understanding when he is speaking of the future hope versus the current reality of his day. That future hope, when he's going to have a spiritual resurrected body that sins no more, according to the Ruah, the Torah in the Ruah, versus his current circumstance where he's living in the day, a time when he's still dealing with his flesh and the impediment of flesh and the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law. So it becomes, knowing timing and substance will help you understand Paul and separate when he's talking about future and that great hope and expectation, or when he's talking about his current circumstances and what you do in the current circumstances as you are trying to overcome flesh, using the writings of the letters, etc. That'll be another. I do want to, if I can, address Paul and just share things I find in Paul that will help one understand what he's trying to say on these topics. But to go to the timing of the resurrection, we'll find certainly in the new writings, but I think also in the old writings too, it's evident that the timing of the resurrection, it occurs when he gathers his elect together. And we understand, and we're going to find that that gathering together of the elect is at the very beginning of the day of Yahuwah. Now we know the day of Yahuwah, the church, Christianity knows the day of Yahuwah as the day of the Lord, but that's because they're using modern translations that have replaced Yahuwah, the name Yahuwah, with the title Lord. And if we remove the title Lord, it really comes back to the day of Yahuwah versus the day of the Lord. But we know that the gathering occurs at the beginning. It's the initial beginning of the day of the Lord. The day of the Lord is hearkened in when we see a sign in the sun and the moon and the stars, and then we see Messiah, Yahushua, coming on the clouds with power and great esteem or great glory. And that's it. That's when it begins, and that's when the world knows they've got trouble because they have set themselves against this pretty awesome Elohim. Um, But that is when it initiates, and the very next thing that happens as Yahushua comes on the clouds is he sends his messengers out to the four corners of the Shemayim according to Matthew, but the four corners of the world and the four corners of heaven in Mark. So he sends his angels out to gather his elect wherever they may be in time and place. If the elect from way back when are going to be gathered from where they are kept, and the elect of today will be gathered from wherever they're at. Um, you may be the seed of Abraham literally in the flesh, or you may be the seed of Abraham according to the spirit. Either way, you belong to Israel and the modern church. Uh, the real believers, the true believers, belong to Israel. And so, from wherever Israel is, if you're in Indiana and you're a believer and you've joined yourself to Israel, from there you will be gathered, whether you have died and been buried here and gone to Sheol, or wherever your spirit may be once you have died, or whether you're living in Indiana, you're going to be gathered. And the timing of that is at the initiation of the day of Yahuwah, which we will also know and you'll see referred to as the last day. There's teaching certainly in Jubilees, but also Peter refers to it where he affirms that a day is like 1,000 years to Yahweh. So if you take a 7-day week and each day is 1,000 years, then the concept is that first 1,000 years was day one, the second 1,000 years was day two, and we're approaching the end of the sixth day, or the 6,000th year, and we're getting ready to go into the seventh day, which is the last day because there are only 7 days. So we refer to that last day, that last 1,000 years, as the last day oftentimes, but we'll also refer to it as the millennial period, and some other things. But the essence is that the timing of the gathering, or the rapture, or the whatever you want to call it, the catching away, it is at the end of that sixth day, or that 6,000th year, um, and the beginning of that seventh day, or that millennial period. Now, if you're a student of eschatology and Christianity, you probably more closely associate the day of the Lord with the wrath of Yahweh, or the wrath of God, um, or the judgment that he metes out upon the unbelieving world, which is true. I mean, it does happen, but the very first event of that seventh day, of the day of Yahweh, is the sign in the sun, moon, and stars, Yahushua coming on the clouds, and the angels gathering the elect from wherever they are. That's the first event. And then we're taken up into um, where he is, which I believe is going to be the New Jerusalem, which is either in heaven or between heaven and earth at that time. There's evidence that that's where we're going to be taken, and I hope to do a video where I can go through some of the chronology of that event. But that day of the Lord initiates with the judgment of, or I'm sorry, that gathering together, and then once we've been removed, then the judgment of Yahuwah begins on earth and lasts until it's over, until Messiah comes down with his legions and destroys the armies of the world and ushers in his kingdom, and brings down the New Jerusalem, or the Mount Zion. And before we get started, let me also share with you what the substance of the resurrection will be. When we are resurrected, we will be resurrected into heavenly bodies, spiritual bodies that may have a spiritual flesh. I think as much as we're going to be spiritual like the messengers, I think we will also probably be different in some respects to the messengers. But either way, we will both be of a spiritual nature rather than an earthly, fleshly nature. And that new nature comes upon us at the resurrection. Until then, we are in the flesh. Those who have died have already lost their flesh, but their spirit awaits somewhere. Uh, We know of Sheol, the teachings of Sheol, and wherever your spirit is being held, it is awaiting this moment in time when the resurrection occurs, when it is united with its new body. For those of us who may be alive at the time of resurrection, the flesh will be instantaneously changed. But either way, our nature will be changed from earthly and bound by flesh to a spiritual and not bound by flesh and enabled like a spiritual being. While we are in the flesh, we are subjected to know the Torah, to know the will of Yahuwah. We have to refer to the writings of Scripture and the Torah and the instructions that we know that our flesh, in combination with Satan, uses against us, because Paul teaches us when the command comes, so does sin, because our flesh rises up and wars against it with little help of the enemy all the time. Uh, so while we're here and before the resurrection, we are struggling with our flesh against our flesh. And our only way to, we get some help now that Messiah has come, because the Holy Spirit has come and we have a helper, but we still struggle and we do not have perfect understanding. But when we receive our resurrected body, it's going to be a spiritual body. And as we'll see in the old writings, it's going to have spiritual enablements. We will have the Torah written on our heart, and you will see we will no longer need the letter, because we're just going to know it. We're just going to know what we need to do to walk in the ways of Yahweh. And that's what Paul teaches quite a bit when he talks about the letter of the law that kills versus the spirit that gives life. Because when we are resurrected, it is all in the spirit. We're living out Torah, so we're living. We live, and we live eternally. While we're in the flesh, we are failing with Torah, so we are disobedient to Torah, and the penalty for that is death. So in the flesh, we have no hope. It is all death. In the spirit, we have all hope. But that's also where Messiah comes in too, because he's the one that delivers us from this flesh and makes that resurrection possible. He's the one that brought that to us. Um, I may, as we get started here, I may end up splitting this into two. I may, as we approach the old writings, if it seems like it's going long and I'm struggling to be succinct, then I'll split it into two videos, and I'll let you know as we get towards the end of this video. Thanks. As I get started here, I would like to let you know that I'm getting ready to read, and I'm going to be reading from the Yah scriptures. The Yah scriptures come from the Hallelujah scriptures, which are built off of the work of C.J. Coster. And C.J. Coster, uh, his attempts were to restore the name of Yahweh. That was one of his primary purposes. But he also found much deistic words in Greek that then spilled over into English, as the Greek manuscripts were used to translate into English. And so he tried to write out as many of those deistic Greek words as he could. But he passed away in the 1990s, and then the Institute for Scripture Research took up his work, but then also so did the Hallelujah Scriptures, and the Hallelujah Scriptures took his work and expanded upon it. So they've removed even more words that have deistic meaning, and they've removed much of the italicized words that you'll see, where words have been inserted in an attempt to make the meaning more clear in Scripture. But unfortunately, the more a translator inserts words, the more they're actually interpreting for us, which I would prefer not to have. I'd rather have a literal translation with as few inputs from the translators as possible. And I think Hallelujah Scriptures has achieved this as much as anybody. Or actually Yah Scriptures now is what I'm working from here, because they've produced it in a PDF that I can work from. But I noticed as I was just reviewing a little bit of what I have done so far, which forgive me that I'm not a professional video maker, and so it's a little bit herky jerky. But I also use the term ruah, um, because ruah is commonly used in the Hallelujah or in the scriptures and in the Yah scriptures. It's used in place of the Spirit. So ruah, if you hear me say ruah, it is an English rendition of the word that is more commonly in the modern translations interpreted as spirit. So they are one and the same. And then there will be many, as I read through this, many words that will be unfamiliar to those who are not reading from these scriptures. And I will try to explain those and bring those out as much as possible as I go through this. But concerning the timing, Messiah himself gives us the timing. And he gives us the timing in his Olivet discourse that we understand to be there's a point where they're looking at the temple, and Messiah tells his disciples there's coming a day when not one stone will be left upon it. So then his disciples query him on it and want to know when these days shall be, what they should expect. So Messiah sits down and begins to teach them uh, on the Mount of Olives, and so it became known as the Olivet Discourse. And we have uh, three accounts of it: one in the Gospel of Matthew, one in the Gospel of Mark, and another account in the Gospel of Luke. The Matthew account is obviously the largest, longest, and most well known of the Olivet discourses. And I'm going to take opportunity. I'm just going to read the Matthew account, not all of it, of course, but I'm interested in asserting the timing here. And let me set the stage, because we know as the sixth day approaches the end, as the 6,000th year approaches the end, that in the end times, there will be a consolidation of the world systems, and antichrist is going to come on the scene. We might also know of him as the beast with his prophet and some other things, but the antichrist comes on the scene and begins to control the world, and then he will, as he makes himself known, he will begin to persecute Israel and the church and those who keep the commands. And it is this time of persecution that he brings out. It's you can find it. It's found in the old writings. It's spoken of by Messiah here, but it's a time of persecution and distress and tribulation that is unlike any that have occurred in history, which of course we know we've had some pretty significant and terrible tribulations in throughout history. But with regard to this timing, there's a tribulation that the Antichrist brings that is the greatest of all time. Never before and never since, and or never again shall there be a tribulation like it. And that sets the stage, because that is the end of this age. It is the end of the sixth day, and then from there, at the end of that sixth day, begins the seventh day and the day of Yahuwah. And that's what we're going to see Messiah bring out in Matthew 24 here. And I'm going to start with 15. And most of us know this story. So when you see the abomination that lays waste, spoken of by Daniel, the Nabi, and the Nabi is the word for prophet, put up in the Mikdash, which is the word for sanctuary. He who reads, let him understand. Then let those who are in Yehuda, which is Judea, flee to the mountains, and let him who is on the housetop not come down to take whatever out of his house, and let him who is in the field not turn back to get his garments. And woe to those who are pregnant and those who are nursing children in those days, and pray that your flight does not take place in the winter or on the Sabbath. For then there shall be great distress, such as not been since the beginning of the world until this time, no, nor ever shall be. And if those days were not shortened, no flesh would be saved. But for the sake of the chosen ones, those days shall be shortened. If anyone then says to you, look, here is the Hamashiach, or Messiah, or there, do not believe, for false messiahs and false prophets shall arise, and they shall show great signs and wonders, so as to lead astray, if possible, even the chosen ones. See, I have forewarned you. So if they say, look, he is in the desert, do not go out. Or look, he is in the inner rooms, do not believe. For as the lightning comes from the east and shines to the west, so also shall the coming of the Ben of Adam be. Ben is son. For wherever the dead body is, there the vulture shall be gathered also. There the vulture shall be gathered together. And immediately after the distress of those days, the sun shall be darkened, and the moon shall not give its light, and the stars shall fall from the Shemaim, and the powers of the Shemaim shall be shaken. And then the sign of the Ben of Adam shall appear in the Shemaim. Shemaim is heavens, by the way. And then all the tribes of earth shall mourn, and they shall see the Ben of Adam coming on the clouds of the Shemaim with power and much esteem, or much glory. And he shall send his messengers with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his chosen ones from the four winds, from one end of the Shemaim to the other. So going back up, we'll see that this gathering takes place at the end of the distress, and when the sign, first of all, the distress is happening, and then there is a sign that begins, that initiates the day of the Lord and ends the great distress. It is the separation of the sixth day and the seventh day. It's the beginning, and we know the very first thing that happens. And let me get there is. Immediately after the distress of these days, the sun shall be darkened, and the moon shall not give its light, and the stars shall fall from the Shemaim, and the powers of the Shemaim shall be shaken. So this is well documented throughout the old writings, through the prophets, that the initiation of the day of the Lord begins with this, the sun being dark and the moon not giving its light, and the stars falling from heaven, which we will just call signs in the sun, moon, and stars. That's the first, and that's the very first thing that begins when the day of Yahuwah begins. And it ends immediately. The distress of those days, the great tribulation, is ended in that moment, as everybody is looking up and noticing and seeing all these great signs happening. And quite frankly, the, the the people of this world who have set themselves against Yahuwah will mourn, because they know that of the time of the wrath of Yahuwah has come. And it's them. They're the ones that are going to experience that. But as the sun is darkened and the moon doesn't give its light and the stars fall, the son of Adam, the Ben of Adam, the Son of God, appears on the clouds, bringing his angels with him. And in that moment, as the day of Yahuwah is beginning, the sign in the sun, moon, and stars is happening, Messiah appears on the clouds with his angels and sends those angels out to wherever they need to go to gather together all of Israel from the past, all of Yisrael from the current, and all of Yisrael that is living in those days. From wherever they are, the angels will go to gather them and collect them. And while this is happening, there will be the shout of the chief angels or the archangels. There will be trumpets blowing. It will be an event. It's not going to be secret. It's going to be announced. It's going to be momentous. And so, just in summary, the timing of the gathering that we will find in the old writings, and that we will hear Paul speaking of here in just a bit, is at the end of the sixth day and at the beginning of the seventh day, which is the last day, which is the day of Yahuwah. So the gathering takes place right at the beginning of the day of Yahweh, and right at the beginning of the last day. So from here, I would like to just more or less do a word study on resurrection, I guess. Um, so I've gone to the front of the Yah scriptures here, and I've typed in resurrection for a word search, and I'm going to go ahead and move forward with that. So it identified 42 times that the word resurrection is used in the Yah scriptures. Now it may be different, I suppose, in modern translations, but I really What I'm getting ready to talk about, I believe, will be true of the modern translations too. I would like to make note that the first time we see resurrection, the word resurrection appear, is in the New Writings starting in the Gospel account of Matthew. And starting with the account that most students of Scripture know, when the Sadducees come on the scene, and I'll just quickly read it for you here. On that day, and I'm in this is Matthew 22, verse 23. On that day, Sadducees, who say there is no resurrection, came to him and asked him, saying, Teacher, Moshe said that if anyone should die having no children, his brother shall marry his wife and raise offspring for his brother. And there were with us 7 brothers, and the first died after he had married, and having no children, left his wife to his brother. In the same way, the second also, and the third, and unto the seventh. And last of all, the woman died too. At the resurrection, then, whose wife of the 7 shall she be? For all of them had her. Well, we're going to see this account in Mark and Luke, so I'm not going to reread that account each time. But I do want to read Messiah, Yahushua's response in each of the accounts, because in 2 of them they're pretty close to identical, but in the third one, Luke, it expounds a little bit more. But I would also like to just make some commentary here. We didn't see the word resurrection in the old writings, but the concept of resurrection was not new. And I would also say that sometime between um, when those scriptures were written by Moses and the prophets, and between then and Messiah's coming the first time, clearly the conversation of resurrection, the word that is being translated as resurrection, came on the scene. It became a discussion because there was an argument. The Pharisees were arguing that there was a resurrection. The Sadducees say there is no resurrection. Um, so this whole concept of resurrection, even though it had not been used or identified by word in the scripture, what we knew as the scriptures, or at least the ones that I'm familiar with so far, and I'm working on building that repertoire of scriptures and learning. I mean, that's one of my goals, is to move into some of the additional scriptures that have been lost to us and hidden from us. But clearly, resurrection had become a topic prior to Messiah, a hot topic, and so it does not originate at this moment, and it didn't originate with Messiah, and it didn't even originate with the new writings. It originated somewhere before the new writings began to occur. So let me go down to the Yahushua's response to them, because this is telling. And Yahushua answering said to them, You go astray, not knowing the scriptures nor the power of Elohim. That's a powerful statement to make. For in the resurrection they do not marry, nor are they given in marriage, but are as messengers of Elohim in the Shemaim. And concerning the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what was spoken to you by Elohim, saying, I am the Elohim of Abraham, and the Elohim of Yitzchak, and the Elohim of Jacob. Yahweh is not the Elohim of the dead, but of the living. So a couple comments here in Messiah's response. One of the things that is noteworthy is tells them, you just don't understand and know scriptures. You have not followed scriptures, so you're just misinterpreting scriptures. And then he goes on to tell them that in the resurrection they don't marry. So your whole premise is wrong. They're not marrying, but they're as messengers of Elohim in the Shemaim. Now, I would say that many, when I've heard commentary on this, most of them say that we're in the resurrection, we are going to be like the messengers or the angels, in the sense that we do not marry or are not given in marriage. Elsewhere, we're going to find where we're not just like them because we aren't going to be marrying, but we're also like them because we're going to be of a spiritual nature, as they are of a spiritual nature. Um, Let me go on to the Mark account here. Let me tab through these. So we've got 42 accounts of resurrection, and a goodly number of them are in these same 3 accounts. So let me just go ahead and move forward. Well, here's another use of the word resurrection, but this has to do with Messiah's resurrection and not our resurrection. Now, of course, his resurrection is the first. It's the most important resurrection, because without his resurrection, none of the rest of the resurrection occurs. But this is a comment to his resurrection, and it is in reference to the time when the tombs were open and the bodies of the Kodeshim, or saints who had fallen asleep, were raised and came out of the tombs after his, Messiah's resurrection, and they went into the Kodesh city and appeared to many, or into the set apart spirit city, or the holy city, which would be Jerusalem. Okay, so move on to the next one. And so here's the Mark account. Same thing, the Sadducees who say there's no resurrection. Pretty much it's the same conversation. And so in the resurrection, then, when they rise, whose wife shall she be? For 7 had her as wife. And Yahushua answering said to them, is this not why you go astray? Because you do not know the scriptures, nor the power of Elohim? There's the rebuke worded just a little bit differently. For when they raise from the dead, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are as messengers in the Shemaim. Same approach. Now I will say that in verse 25 he didn't use resurrection there. They just said when they rise from the dead. So not that it matters a whole lot, but resurrection and rising from the dead are synonymous, clearly. So let's go to what I think there's another account. Here's another use of the word resurrection that I think also has some value, and it's in the context of Messiah telling people that in fact, let's just go to 12. And he also said to them, actually start in 11, for everyone who is exalting himself shall be humbled, and he who is humbling himself shall be exalted. And he also said to him who invited him, when you give a dinner or a supper, do not ask your friends, nor your brothers, nor your relatives, nor your rich neighbors, lest they also invite you back, and you be repaid. But when you give a feast, invite poor ones, crippled ones, lame ones, blind ones, and you shall be Baruch, because they do not have to repay you. For you shall be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. A couple quick comments there. Um, it's clearly teaching a resurrection, but it's also distinguishing between the resurrection of it is distinguishing the resurrection of the righteous, and I will show you in a few moments, and that's juxtaposed against the resurrection of the rest, the ones that are not counted as worthy of that age or worthy of the first resurrection. And so we move on to the next. And okay, so this is the Luke account of the encounter with the Sadducees, and starting at verse 27 here, but we go down to verse 34 where Yahushua answers them, because it provides some additional information that we didn't get in the other two accounts. And so in verse 34, and Yahushua answering said to them, the sons of this age marry and are given in marriage. But those who are counted worthy of attaining that age and the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are they given in marriage. For neither is it possible for them to die any more, because they are like messengers and are sons of Elohim, being sons of the resurrection. But that the dead are raised, even Moshe showed at the bush when he called Yahuwah the Elohim of Abraham and the Elohim of Yitzchak and the Elohim of Jacob. Now he is not the Elohim of the dead, but of the living, for all live to him. So I want to just comment and point out that in verse 35, where he affirms that there are those that are going to be counted worthy of attaining that age and worthy of attaining the resurrection. Not all will. And it's those who will be when they are resurrected, it will be impossible for them to die anymore in verse 36, because they're going to be like messengers. So in this account, I'm saying not only are we like messengers in that we do not marry, but we're also like messengers in that we are of spirit entities, of spirit being now, never to die again. And in that moment, we will be sons of Elohim. And when we get to the old writings, you're going to see such a constant themes of I will be their Elohim and they will be my children, my people, and I will be their father and they will be my son. And so just the use of resurrection here in the new writings, but the same concept found in the old writings. So let's move on to the next. See if we find another account here. So this is in John. We've moved into John, and this will be John 5. And I'll just read it to you. Well, I'll start up in 22. Let me get there real quick. For the Father judges no one, but has given all judgment to the Ben, that all should value the Ben, even as they value the Father. He who does not value the Ben does not value the Father who sent him. Truly, truly, I say to you, he who hears my word and believes in him who sent me possesses everlasting high, and does not come into judgment, but has passed from death into high. Truly, truly, I say to you, the hour is coming, and now is, when the dead shall hear the voice of the Ben of Elohim, and those having heard shall live. For as the Father possesses high in himself, so he gave also to the Ben to possess high in himself. And he has given him authority also to do judgment, because he is the Ben of Adam. Do not marvel at this, because the hour is coming in which all those in the tomb shall hear his voice and shall come forth, those who have done good to the resurrection of high, and those who have practiced evil to a resurrection of judgment. Okay, so this is loaded. So let me comment here that it's when we receive Messiah that we receive everlasting life, never to die again. So even though we remain in this flesh and struggle with this flesh, our flesh is dealt with. The punishment of our sin has been laid upon Messiah, and he has taken it. So those of us who hear him and believe him and receive him and all that he is, that person, that believer will possess everlasting life, and that person will never come into judgment. The judgment has been laid on Messiah. We're worthy of judgment, or we were worthy of judgment, except for Messiah. Now when the Father, when Yahuwah uh, sees us and sees, whether he just doesn't see our sin anymore, because it's all been laid upon Messiah. I'm sorry, I'm preaching there, but um, and then I think it's important to say the hour is coming, and when the dead shall hear the voice of the Ben of Elohim, and those having heard shall live. Uh, and maybe the time now is. I'm not quite sure what to do with that, because there is this concept: are we actually, is our spirit wherever is the person that has passed away and who is asleep, according to Paul? Are they literally asleep, like you would be asleep in their spirit, not interacting in some manner? I'm not sure what to do with that, because we have the encounter of Lazarus with the rich ruler, and they're Lazarus sitting in Abraham's bosom in what appears to be Sheol, with a chasm in between them, and they're interacting in some way. I don't really know what to do with that. What I do know what to do with it is that the one of us, those of us who have heard him, we have received everlasting life. Now, but there is this time when we are going to hear his voice. Now, in this moment when he's speaking here, when he says the time now is when the dead shall hear his voice, is that the future event? I'm not 100% sure whether we are hearing, if the dead are hearing him now. But I do think later, when we get down to verse 28, when he says, don't marvel at this, because the hour is coming in which all in the tombs shall hear his voice and shall come forth. So in that moment, when he comes on the clouds and we hear the shout and we hear the trumpet, those who are waiting for him in Sheol or wherever they are will hear his voice and will come forth as the angels come to get them. In that moment, that is the resurrection. And that is the resurrection. That is the gathering that takes place at the initiation of the seventh day, at the beginning of the day of Yahweh. And I'll also just comment quickly, because we commented on it before. There is this first resurrection that we're talking about now that occurs at the beginning um, of the day of Yahweh, but this is the resurrection of the righteous. There is a second resurrection that will occur at the end of the 1,000 years, that will include the resurrection of any righteous that are found in that millennial period that have become righteous since that first resurrection. But all of the unrighteous, those from the beginning of time through that millennial period, will also be raised. And that's called the Great White Throne Judgment, where both sides, the good and the bad, will receive their judgment and receive their rewards, good or bad. Okay, so moving on. Um, This is the encounter of Mary and Martha with, Martha with Yahushua, and it's a wonderful account. But Lazarus has died. For everybody who knows, Lazarus has died. Messiah delayed coming, and waited for him to actually fall asleep or die. Um, so let me go and just start with. We'll just start at verse 19. And many of the Yehudim had come to Mary, and the Yehudim are the people of Yah, Yahu's people, had come to Martha and Miriam, which is Mary, to comfort them concerning their brother. Martha then, when she heard that Yahushua was coming, met him, but Miriam was sitting in the house. Martha then said to Yahushua, Adonai, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that whatever you might ask of Elohim, Elohim shall give you. And Yahushua said to her, Your brother shall rise again. And Martha said to him, I know that he shall rise again at the resurrection at the last day, or in the resurrection at the last day. Yahushua said to her, I am the resurrection and the high. He who believes in me, though he dies, he shall live. And everyone that is living and believing in me shall never die at all. Do you believe this? Let me go back up, because while it's wonderful, it's just a wonderful account, and we could just leave it there. It's worth noting in verse 21 that Yahushua had been teaching his Talmidim, which are his taught ones or his disciples, that of whom Martha clearly was one and Mary was one, that there is a resurrection, and that all the believers shall rise again at the resurrection that occurs at the last day. So it's in the last day, and we know from other passages that it's at the very beginning, the almost the first thing of that last day, or the day of Yahweh, that this is occurring. Okay, I believe, let's see. Okay, now we move into Acts, and here's a comment of the resurrection related to Messiah's resurrection, and this is Peter speaking in the early part of Acts. I'm not going to spend time there because it's a little bit redundant. And then here's the Acts again, where he's commenting that, that there was, that I believe this is being a Nabe, and this is David speaking of and foreseeing that he spoke concerning the resurrection of Hamashiach without corruption, etc. But I won't go. That's a topic of another day. Um, Here is another. This is when the Sadducees and the priests are all being the Kohanim, which is the priests, and the captain of the Mikdash, which is the temple. And the Sadducees came upon them, and they were annoyed because the disciples of the Talmudim were teaching the people and announcing the resurrection of the dead. So we go to the next, and this is Peter in the same, I believe it's in the same speech that he's giving, speaking of the resurrection of the Adon again. And then we move to Acts, and I believe this is Paul. Yeah, when he's coming upon, in fact, I'll just read it here. But while Shaul was waiting for them at Atheniae, his spirit was stirred up within him when he saw that the city was utterly idolatrous. Therefore, indeed, he was reasoning in the congregation with the Yehudim and with the Gentile worshippers, and in the marketplace daily with those who met there. And some of the Epicurean and the Stoic philosophers encountered him, and some were saying, What does this babbler want to say? Others said, He seems to be a proclaimer of the strange, mighty ones, because to them he brought the good news of Yahushua and the resurrection. That is the good news. Yahushua, deliverance, and part of his deliverance from sin is obtaining for us the resurrection, and that's the good news. Let's move on to the next here. I believe his next will be his. Yeah, okay, no, this is just more of the, a little bit later in that same encounter. Having heard the resurrection of the dead, some indeed mocked, and the others said, We shall hear you again concerning this. So we'll move on to the next, and I believe the next is, this is when he's giving his defense and, playing the Pharisees against the Sadducees and saying, this is when I'm being judged concerning the expectation of the resurrection of the dead. And just a little more here in verse 8. So let's move on to the next. And here is Paul again a little bit later in Acts, defending himself again because he was always getting into trouble. But here he's just asserting that he's having an expectation in Elohim, which they themselves also wait for, that there is to be a resurrection of the dead, both of the righteous and the unrighteous. The righteous in the first resurrection and the unrighteous in the second resurrection, and probably some of the righteous from the millennial period in that second resurrection too. Um, and here he is saying it's again because of the resurrection of the dead that he's being judged and tried. So let's move on to the next. Okay, so here is 1 Corinthians 15. And this is just a huge, this might be the most informative chapter in all of the new writings about the resurrection. So I actually want to come back to this in a moment. So let me go finish up a few things. So the next one, let's see, that's Corinthians again, um, 1 Corinthians again, which we're coming back to. Okay, and here is a mention of resurrection in Romans, where he's just talking about the resurrection of Messiah again. Here's another resurrection, use of the word resurrection in Romans when, this is Romans, and this is one of the reasons why I believe you need to know the timing so you can interpret, not just timing, but the substance, so that you can interpret what Paul is saying. So let me read 6 here because it's a pretty important verse as well. What then shall we say? Shall we continue in sin to let favor increase? Let it not be. How shall we who died to sin still live in it? Or do you not know that as many of us who were immersed into Mashiach, Yahushua, were immersed into his death? We were therefore buried with him through immersion into his death, that as Mashiach was raised from the dead by the esteem of the Father, so also we should walk in newness of high. For if we have come to be grown together in the likeness of the death of his death, we shall be also of the resurrection. Knowing this, that our old man was impaled with him, so that the body of sin might be rendered powerless to serve sin no longer. For he who has died has been made right from sin. And if we died with Mashiach, we believe that we shall also live with him, knowing that Mashiach, having been raised from the dead, dies no more. Death no longer rules over him. For in that he died to sin once for all. But in that he lives to Elohim. So you also reckon yourselves to be dead indeed to sin, but alive to Elohim in Mashiach our Adon. So I do want to expound upon this, but I'm going to have to reserve that for another video, or it would just overtake this video. I will just quickly say that this is the reason why we need to understand the timing and the substance, because I think what's important is not only is he acknowledging that there's a resurrection of his death, but that we are to reckon ourselves to be dead indeed to sin and alive to Elohim in Mashiach our Adon. And the reason we must reckon is that we did not literally die. If Paul in that moment, and to the people he's speaking with, had not literally died at that moment in time, and they had not literally been resurrected, they were believers and had become probably born again. I mean, there's a whole discussion of what born again means, but whatever, having believed in Messiah, they are now forever beings. They have everlasting life. But while for that season of time that they remained on earth in this earthly body, they struggled with sin. So it is the objective to reckon ourselves dead, and then also reckon ourselves to be alive in that expectation of life. And we reckon ourselves dead to sin so that we can struggle. We just simply do not accept sin. We battle against sin. We try to be dead to sin so that we can do what's right. And so it's just a battle. That is the now battle juxtaposed against the future lack of battle, no necessary battle. That is just to go back, that is the battle in the flesh against the letter of the word, where we have, the letter, the command has come, and basically our flesh and our and the enemy together are using that command to basically kill us with sin. And we're struggling against the letter, and we will until we receive that life. And the Torah is written on it. We're going to have our spiritual body, and that Torah is written in, it's encoded in our heart, in our body, and we're just going to be able to do it. And so from that moment of resurrection on, we will never struggle with sin again. It's a thing of the past. Okay, let's go on to the next, see what else we get to here. All right, so we're in Philippians, and that's also important. This is following up, where he's basically saying he gave up everything gladly for what Mashiach has brought to him. Um, not having my own righteousness, which is of the law, but which is through belief in Mashiach, the righteousness which is of Elohim on the basis of belief, to know him and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his sufferings, being conformed to his death, if somehow I might attain to the resurrection out from the dead. Not that I have already received it or already been perfected, but I press on to lay hold of that for which Mashiach Yahushua has laid hold of me. Brothers, I do not count myself to have laid hold of it yet, but only this, forgetting what is behind and reaching out for what lies ahead, I press on toward the goal of the prize of the high calling of Elohim and Mashiach Yahushua. As many then as are perfect should have this in mind, and if you think differently in any respect, Elohim shall reveal to you. So he is not perfect yet. Where did he say this? Not that have I received it or already been perfected. He's acknowledging he's still struggling with sin. He is still struggling with the flesh. He has not been perfected. But this is what he's holding out for, this resurrection out from the dead. And it's at that time that he will be perfected. He will be perfected and he will sin no more. The struggle is over, and that's what he's looking forward to. All right, let me move on to okay, here's 2 Timothy. And their word shall eat its way like gangrene. And okay, so who have missed concerning the truth, saying that the resurrection has already taken place and overthrown the belief of some. Okay, I won't really spend any time here, but there were clearly some teaching that the resurrection had already taken place, and Paul's being clear it has not. Okay, and here's the resurrection of dead in Hebrews. And he's basically telling people, he's just affirming that the resurrection of the dead is a basic doctrine to which we should be well past this. If we were mature, we should have grown past the teaching of immersions and the laying on of hands and the resurrection of dead and of everlasting judgment. And this we shall do if Elohim indeed permits. So we're supposed to be moving on to that, from that, because we're supposed to understand it. It's supposed to be basic understanding. I'm not sure what to do with this is the Hebrews 11, the Hall of Faith, fame. And I'm not sure women receive their dead by resurrection. I'm not sure exactly what is meant there. I'm not going to go study it out right now. But I do want to comment on the second half of that verse, that clearly people prior to Messiah, certainly prior to Paul and probably prior to Messiah, understood the resurrection and how valuable it is. They understood that they had something better coming than what they have now. They understood that they have this spiritual body, and they're even under torture, they're not willing to say whatever they need to say to accept release from the torture. They would rather be tortured so that they could obtain that better resurrection and that better hope. Okay, let's move on to the next. And here is Peter referring to the resurrection of Yahushua. I believe he's going to refer to him again here in a minute. Yeah, this is Peter again speaking of the resurrection of Yahushua. And now we move on to Revelation in verse 20, where speaking of the latter, after all the judgments, this is the time when, well, here, I'll just read it for you. It'll just start at the beginning of verse 20. And I saw a messenger coming down from the Shemaim, having the key to the pit of the deep and a great chain in his hand. And he seized the dragon, the serpent of old, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. And he threw him into the pit of the deep and shut him up and put a seal on him, so that he should lead the nations no more astray until the 1,000 years were ended. And after that he has to be released for a little while. And I saw thrones, and they that sat on them, and judgment. And I saw thrones, and they that sat on them, and judgment was given to them. And the lives of those who had been beheaded because of the witness they bore to Yahuwah, and because of the word of Yahuwah, and who did not worship the beast nor his image, and did not receive his mark upon their foreheads or upon their hands, and they lived and reigned with Mashiach for 1,000 years. And the rest of the dead did not come to high until the 1,000 years were ended. This is the first resurrection. Barak and Kodesh is the one having part in the first resurrection. The second death possesses no authority over these, but they shall be Kohanim, or priests of Yahuwah and of Mashiach, and shall reign with him 1,000 years. So let me just go back up here, where we're going to start in verse 4 to make sure that we don't get confused by what is being said here. So he saw thrones, and they that sat on them, and judgment was given to them. So he saw thrones, and this is the resurrected. This is us. This is the saints throughout history, the Kodeshim throughout history, all of history, and those of us who are part of that first resurrection, the resurrection of the righteous. We will be amongst those that he's seeing sitting on thrones and judgment given to us. So we're going to be sitting in judgment, and you're going to see later it's us that they're referring to as priests and kings and ruling with Mashiach. And in addition to those that sat on the throne are the lives of those who had been beheaded because of the witness they bore to Yahushua and because of the word of Yahuwah, and who did not worship the beast. I don't know if they, because of what they endure at that time, if they're going to get special treatment beyond what the original, those of us who do not experience that martyrdom in that great tribulation or great distress. I don't know if it's something more different, but John separates them. Here's the ones that are given, and then also, here are the resurrected, and then here are also the lives of those who had been beheaded. And these are the ones that were raised in the first resurrection. It is the rest of the dead that did not come to life until the 1,000 years were ended, which is the second death and second resurrection. So all of this that occurs in 4, this is the first resurrection. And Barak and Kodesh is the one having part in the first resurrection. All of these folks up here. It's the second death. And the second death possesses no authority over these. So really, having been resurrected in the first, what's going to happen in the second resurrection at the end of the 1,000 years, when the rest of the dead are going to come to life, that will have no bearing upon us. So I believe that's the last of resurrection in the new writings. It is. So here we are back at Matthew. Well, here we are going back to 1 Corinthians 15, and I'm going to need to spend just a little bit of time here, and I'm sorry, this video is taking longer than I'd hoped for, and clearly to cover the the old writings is going to have to be a second video. I'm sorry, but I do need to go through 1 Corinthians because of it just is such a meaningful it's just such a meaningful passage. And I'm going to read it. I'm going to read a goodly portion, not all of 15, but I need to read much of 15 for you and then I'll break it down. So let me just start in verse 11 of 1 Corinthians 15. Whether then it was I or they, so we were proclaimed, and so you believed. If Mashiach is proclaimed that he has been raised from the dead, how do some of you say that there is no resurrection of the dead? And if there is no resurrection of the dead, then Mashiach has not been raised. And if Mashiach has not been raised, then our proclaiming is empty, and your belief also empty. And we are also found false witnesses of Elohim, because we have witnessed of Yahuwah that he raised up Mashiach, whom he did not raise up, if then the dead are not raised. For if the dead are not raised, then neither Mashiach has been raised. And if Mashiach has not been raised, your belief is to no purpose, and you are still in your sins. Then also those who have fallen asleep in Mashiach have perished. If in this life only we have expectation of Mashiach, we are of all men the most wretched. But now Mashiach has been raised from the dead and has become the first fruit of those who have fallen asleep. For since death is through a man, resurrection of the dead is also through a man. For as all die in Adam, so also all shall be made alive in Mashiach, and each in his own order. Mashiach the first fruits, then those who are of Mashiach at his coming, and then the end, when he delivers up the reign of Yahuwah the Father, when he delivers up the reign to Yahuwah the Father, when he has brought to naught all rule and all authority and all power. For he has to reign until he has put all enemies under his feet. The last enemy to be brought to naught is death. For he has put all under his feet. But when he says all are put under him, it is clear that he who put all under him is accepted. And when all are made subject to him, then the Ben himself shall also be subject to him who put all under him, in order that Elohim be all in all. Otherwise, what shall they do who are immersed for the dead? And if the dead are not raised at all, why indeed are they immersed for the dead? And why do we stand in danger every hour? I affirm, by the boasting in you which I have in Mashiach Yahushua our Adon, I die day by day. If, as men do, I have fought with beasts of Ephesus, and of what good is it to me? If the dead are not raised, let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. Do not be led astray. Evil company corrupts good habits. Wake up to soberness righteously, and do not sin, for some do not have the knowledge of Elohim. I speak this to your shame. But someone might say, how are the dead raised up, and with what body do they come? Senseless one, what you sow is not made alive unless it dies. And as to what you sow, you do not sow the body which is to be, but a bare grain. It might be wheat or some other grain, but Elohim gives it a body as he wants, and to each seed a body of its own. All flesh is not the same flesh, but there is one flesh of men, another flesh of beast, and another of fish, and another of birds. Also bodies of the Shemayim and earthly bodies. But the esteem of the Shemayim is truly one, and the esteem of the earthly is another. One esteem of the sun, another esteem of the moon, and another esteem of the stars, for star differs from star in esteem. So also is the resurrection of the dead. It is sown in corruption, and it is raised in incorruption. It is sown in disrespect, and it is raised in esteem. It is sown in weakness, it is raised in power. It is sown a natural body, it is raised a spiritual body. There is a natural body, and there is a spiritual body. And so it has been written, the first man, Adam, became a living being, the last Adam, a life-giving Ruah. The spiritual, however, was not the first, but the natural, and afterward the spiritual. The first man was of the earth, earthy. The second man is the Adon from the Shemayim. As is the earthy, so also are those who are earthy. And as is the Shemayim, so also are those who are of the Shemayim. And as we have borne the likeness of the earthy, we shall also bear the likeness of the Shemayim. And this I say, brothers, that flesh and blood is unable to inherit the reign of Elohim, neither does corruption inherit incorruption. See, I speak a secret to you. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. For this corruptible has to put on incorruption, and this mortal to put on immortality. And when the corruptible has put on incorruption, and this mortal has put on immortality, then shall come to be the word that has been written. Death is swallowed up in overcoming. O death, where is your sting? O grave, where is your overcoming? And the sting of death is sin, and the power of the sin is the Torah. But thanks to Yahuwah who gives us the overcoming through Adon Yahushua HaMashiach. Therefore, my beloved brothers, be steadfast, immovable, always excelling in the work of Adon, knowing that your labor is not in vain in the Adon. So let me go back up and start breaking this down some. I think, let's see, is it verse 19? His first argument here is that people are obviously saying there's no resurrection from the dead, and he's basically saying that without the resurrection of the dead, there is no hope. There's no hope. There's Messiah brings nothing, um, and that without the resurrection, we remain in our sins. It just all of our hope is lost, and if all of our hope is lost, then if all of our hope is in this world, we become really like in verse 19. If in this life only we have expectation of Mashiach, we of all men are the most wretched. But Messiah is raised from the dead, and so we do have the hope. And then he goes on to say, so all die in Adam, in the flesh, so all shall be made alive in Mashiach, in the spirit, which you'll see in a few moments. Mashiach was the first, and then those who at the time of his coming, and this will be his second coming when he comes back, Mashiach is already raised as the first fruits, but at the time of his coming, then also we shall be resurrected and raised up at the end when he delivers up the reign of Yahuwah to the reign to Yahuwah the Father. Yahweh the Father, when he has brought to naught all the rule and authority and the power. There is the day of Yahuwah coming about, and is acknowledging again that it's at his second coming that the rest of us will be raised and resurrected at that time when he's meting out judgment. Well, actually, just before he metes out judgment, but at that time when he's taking over the world. And for us, the last enemy to be put to naught is death. Death is over for us. And he goes on to say, that everything is going to be subjected to him, and when he's done, he's going to give it back to the Father. Um, and then he's talking about those who are baptized or immersed for the dead, and if the dead are not raised, that has no value. And then why do we put ourselves in peril? If we don't truly and wholeheartedly believe this, why are we putting ourselves in danger and peril all the time and fighting? Just fighting if the dead are not raised. Why not just eat and drink, for tomorrow we die? Why not live carefree and just go ahead and, you know, if nothing matters, just go eat and drink and just live, because it's all over soon. But he goes on to say, don't be led astray. Evil company corrupts good habits. Don't hang out with good people. Hang out with those who know. Wake up to soberness righteously and do not sin. Fight the flesh. Reckon yourself dead. Push back and live the life worthy of the calling. For some do not have the knowledge of Elohim, and I speak this to your shame. Okay, so how are the dead raised, and with what body? He goes on to say, Census 1, do you not know? It is not, the new body is not like what you have now. What you sow is not made alive. I'm sorry. What you sow is not the body that will be raised again. He talks about the difference of earthly flesh here between man and beast, but he also goes on to say there is a difference between bodies of the Shemayim, which is body of the heavens. Those are spiritual bodies, and earthly bodies. Um, and there's a clear difference between the two, spiritual and earthly. And so it is with the resurrection of the dead. Our earthly body, which is what we're living in, is sown in corruption. It's got its problems. It's dead and dying. Um, but when it is raised again, it's going to be raised in incorruption. So it's sown in corruption, it's raised in incorruption. It's sown in disrespect, meaning that there's not much of value in it. It's raised in glory and esteem. It's sown in weakness, but it's raised in power. It's sown a natural body, but it's raised a spiritual body. There is a natural body and there is a spiritual body. So here is a clear teaching that this physical body of flesh is what will die, and that flesh will be circumcised and cut off. It will be when we die. The flesh, actually, for people who have already died, their flesh has already been. Um, they're not in the flesh anymore. Their spirit is awaiting wherever they are at, awaiting their new body and the uniting of their new body with their spirit at that time. But clearly, what we've been living in here, which is this earthly realm in earthly bodies, will give way to that spiritual body with spiritual abilities and spiritual capabilities and spiritual relationship to Yahuwah and Elohim. And so that's just important to know. It's sown as a natural body, it's raised as a spiritual body. And it's when we go back to the old writings that we're going to be talking about what the characteristics of that spiritual body is, because that's what I really want to point out. We're going to be seeing in the old writings that they're going to be talking about the gathering, which is the resurrection or the rapture, the gathering together. And then they're going to be talking about the characteristics of the body. And when I get to that video, we'll go through that. Okay, so the spiritual was not first. It followed the flesh, which is obvious. So the first man was of earth, earthy. The second man is of the Shemaim. And it is as is the earthy, so also are those who are earthy. And as is the Shemaim, so also are those who are of the Shemaim. And as we have borne the likeness of the earthy, we shall also bear the likeness of the Shemaim. So this is what I just shared, and I'll restate it again. So we've borne the likeness of the earthy. We've been walking in the flesh like Adam. We were made of earth materials. But as is the Shemaim, upon our resurrection, we will bear the likeness of Shemaim. We will not be made of earth anymore, earth components. We are going to be made of spiritual components. And flesh and blood, earth components, do not inherit the kingdom of Elohim, neither does corruption inherit incorruption. Then he goes on to speak that we're not all asleep. And he's basically saying that some will be alive at the end of time as well. And if you are amongst that crowd, you're not going to precede those who are dead. They're going to be raised first. The angels are going out and they're going to gather them all up, but at basically the same time and almost in the same breath. I mean, I can't imagine that it has any real lag of time. The dead are going to be raised first, and then all those who are alive in the twinkling of an eye will also put off the flesh in that moment and put on the spiritual. For the corruptible has to put on incorruption, and this mortality has to put on immortality. And when the corruptible has put on incorruption, this mortal has put on immortality, then shall come to be the word that has been written, death is swallowed up by overcoming. No more to die, everlasting life. No fear of death, because it can't be. As we just saw, Messiah shared in the Luke version account that when you receive that life, it's impossible for you to die again. So death is over. Death is, where's your sting? Grave, where's your overcoming? All right. So if I can summarize, the timing of the resurrection occurs at the end of this age, as the Antichrist has been putting people to distress and to tribulation, and is ready to stamp out all of the Kodeshim, all of the chosen ones, all of the elect. As we're reaching the end of the age and that culmination, suddenly the day of Yahweh is initiated. It begins with the sign in the sun, moon, and stars. Messiah comes crashing across the clouds. He sends out his angels to gather the elect from wherever they are, the dead from wherever their spirit rests, and the living from wherever they're living in that moment. And the resurrection takes place, and the substance of that resurrection in that moment, we are going to be changed from earthy beings to spiritual beings. We will take on the characteristics of the Shemaim and not the characteristics of earth. And as I will show in the old writings, the characteristics of the Shemaim, that spiritual body, will have ability to follow Yahuwah that we in the flesh find very difficult to do because of the impediment of flesh. And I'll just say also in closing that as he comes back, and when he comes back, and as we are resurrected and caught up together with him in the air, we are going to where he's going to be for a season while he finishes the destruction of the kingdoms of this earth, the enemy, that those who have set themselves against him. We're going to be caught up, and we're going to be up in the air, up in, I believe, New Jerusalem, or Mount Zion, awaiting the finish of that destruction, at which time we and the New Jerusalem is coming back to earth, and the reign of Elohim begins in earnest for 1,000 years on that earth. And we're going to be sitting on thrones. Basically, we're going to have jurisdictions. We're just all going to be leaders and rulers. It's going to be a pretty cool time. Well, thank you. I'm sorry this has run a little long, and I'll be moving off here shortly to do some work on the resurrection in the old writings. Thank you, and may you be Barak.